Hello and welcome to episode 59 of the Page One podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us at the Page One podcast, where we'd like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing process, how they broke into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips as possible. As ever, I would direct you to our back catalogue of some truly fantastic guests that we've had on the podcast. There's all sorts of writers, from authors to screenwriters to comic writers to video game writers, journalists. Any kind, have we had comedians? Yeah, comedians. I mean, I think we've had all sorts of writers on the podcast now. So yeah, please do check out the previous episodes. But before you do, please listen to this one because it's a very good one. Who have we got on this week?
Excellent one. This week we are chatting with Cherie Jones, who is an author from Barbados, who is a lawyer in her spare time. And
yes,
has also written past 20 years of short stories. She's published in PANK, Cadenza, Eclectica, Feminist Wire. She broadcast on BBC Radio 4. And her first novel is just out about a week ago, called How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, and it's been getting some terrific buzz.
Yeah, and we talked to her about how she manages to write all of this stuff while she's still got this day job, and it's quite an incredible thing. The answer is get up. Yeah, exactly. Get up at 3 a.m. is the answer.
I heard her say that's not going to work.
That's incredible devotion. But yeah, she talks to us about all the types of writing she's done. She's done a lot of short stories, as you say, and then flash fiction as well. And then her debut novel is just out, and it's got a lot of buzz. It's a hard-hitting story, but Bernardine Evaristo is on the front cover saying it was a hard-hitting and unflinching novel from a bold new writer, and she's only one of many top writers that are praising this novel.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's really resonated well, and I think you're right. It's a hard story to read, but it's a really beautifully written story at the same time, and it really is a fantastic book. So, I'd highly recommend have a listen to the podcast and then head out and buy a copy of it.
It as a real book, not an ebook.
Yeah, as an ebook.
Anyway, we'll get on with the podcast now after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
I understand that you have a day job as a lawyer. Is that correct? Which is something that both
Yes.
Tarek and I can sympathise with, because well, I've stopped being a lawyer, but Tarek is still a lawyer as well. So,
Wow, that's amazing. You know exactly what it's like.
Exactly. We feel your pain. We feel your pain.
Wow. Yes. Yes.
But you've consistently written, I think, throughout that period. Is writing what you always wanted to do? Was that the goal that you wanted, or the ambition that you had since you were young?
Yeah, I've written compulsively since I can remember. I think when I got to the stage of choosing what I'd do at university, it just never occurred to me that writing could be a career choice. That's sort of not what good art students do in Barbados, or did in my time at least. So I settled for doing something which would use my writing and reading skills. And I went into law as a result. But it took me quite some time, even after I started practicing, to recognize or admit to myself that this was my life's work. And I think I'm a lot closer to being able to go into it full time now. But writing was something that I always knew I wanted to do. It was just, for a long time, it wasn't something that I considered a viable career here in Barbados.
Yeah. And did you get your law degree first, or did you get, I think you got an MA as well. Did you get that? Yes. What order did you do those in?
So I did the law degree first. I did a Bachelor of Laws degree. Then I did what we call the LEC, which is almost like a pupillage, or it's 2 years to get a legal education certificate here after 3 years bachelor's degree. And then I actually also did a master's at Queen Mary in the UK. It was quite some time after that I would have done the MA at Sheffield Hallam University. That was one of those times where I just, the call to write was just stronger than whatever I was doing during the day. And I went to my boss at the time and, said, I'm going to resign. I'm going to go off for a year and do this thing. And he very kindly said to me, if you need a year to do it, go ahead and do it. Your job will be here when you get back. So
fantastic.
Yeah, he was really understanding in that regard. And it meant so much to me because, I'd been working hard before that, but it sort of made me work just that much harder when I came back to feel as if he understood how important it was to me and was willing to support that. So, yes, so I did get the writing MA after that, after the law degree.
I think making that step from, an employment where you've got regular paycheck coming in and stepping out, I imagine that's quite a big step to do. So I think having that support system in place must have been really, really helpful.
Yeah. What had happened in that particular instance was that I won an award that would waive tuition fees for me, and my living expenses were basically my savings. So, it was support in that if it didn't work out, I'd have a job to come back to, and I was able to work on breaks from studying. So that really, really helped. But yes, and that's a decision that I've repeatedly made. I've left what people would consider to be really good jobs in the past and just gone off to just focus on my writing, and then found that, working in retail just seemed to do something to my muse. And, it was even harder to write when I had to worry about expenses and so on. But yes, it is difficult to make that switch. And it's something that I've done repeatedly. So I'll make the choice to focus on my writing. I'll do it for a little while and then come back to the day job. So it's been like that for a number of years.
And you mentioned you got an award. I read that you won the Archie Markham Award and the A.M Heath Prize. Was that while you were at Sheffield Hallam, or was that after?
That was while I was full-time at Sheffield Hallam University. So the Archie Markham Award was more or less a scholarship. It really resulted in the waiver of all tuition fees while I pursued the MA in writing. And then the A.M Heath Prize was a prize awarded to the student with the best manuscript at the end of the course. And that's determined partly by A.M Heath, the literary agency.
Yeah.
So yes.
Fantastic. I mean, that must be a real boost to the confidence of being like, I've made the right decision here, and I've really got a talent that I need to explore.
Yeah, it certainly is. You know, that's one of the wonderful things about this journey. It really helps to have those little signposts along the way, because it's quite it's a solitary endeavor to begin with. But then when you're in a situation where, you know, not a lot of people understand that compulsion or understand why it's important or the contribution it makes to life as we know it generally. There are some people like that. I had one director, you know, who said to me, you know, what is it you're going to study again? And I said, writing. And he said, you mean like what? How to write words? You know, and he was just looking at me like, what are you even thinking? So it really was very, you know, it was really validating to just get these little signposts, these little things along the way that help to say, yes, you're going in the right direction. This is what you should be doing. So yes, that was tremendously helpful.
But I read I think it was on one of your blogs, that there was a point where you had almost given up on the dream of a book deal. And then you had resolved to make 365 submissions in a year. Is that right?
Yes, you've been reading that on Twitter or on my blog. Yes. So that would have been so the same job that allowed me to go off on the master's. Not long after I came back, the company that I was working for was taken over by a large corporation. And some of us were casualties of that whole exercise, and I was one of them. So it was good in one sense, in that, you know, the separation package wasn't bad, and it gave me a little bit of freedom to sort of think about what I wanted to do next. And I decided I wanted to do a PhD. And I started to pursue that. And about 6 months into my PhD, a whole set of things just started to go fantastically wrong. And that ended up with me having to come back to Barbados. And, you know, I can be a planner when it comes to how I want things to work, how I sit down and I sort of plot all the different steps along the way. And for me, it was going to be PhD, you know, teaching job, book deal. And I just had it all worked out in my head. And suddenly, you know, it was like nothing was working out the way that I had planned. And I came back home, you know, and I was really upset about how things turned out. And I think it took me a little while before I was able to talk to myself and say, but, you know, the truth is, you're going to write anyway. Yes, the PhD gave you a really supportive community. It gave you the benefit of some really good critique, guidance on technique and all of that. But I was going to write anyway. And I finally said, you know what, Cherie, maybe you're just pursuing this just that much, just too much too much. And I said, you know, just sit down and write the novel. You don't need a PhD to finish it. Just write the novel and focus on that. You know, when you're done, send out some queries. It might happen, it might not happen, but somehow it became less important at that point in time. And it's just, you know, that's just one of life's great examples of irony, that precisely when I decided to stop pushing so hard was when I actually got the book deal, finished the book and got the book deal. So yeah, there was that point when I said, okay, I'm going to stop pushing. This is something that I was pursuing for ages. I remember a long time ago, I had queried an agent with a few short stories, And I'd done all this research. I read the Writer's Digest and, you know, the Yearbook for Artists and Writers, and they, you know, all these articles, and it said, well, for some really good writers, it takes, you know, they get like tons of rejection slips. Don't worry about it. It's a long process to publication. Just keep working. And so I started off with that mindset. So I queried this agent, this really well-established agent in New York, with 3 stories. And she came back to me and said she wanted to see a full manuscript. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a full manuscript. I expected writers 101, the mistakes you do not want to make, querying before you're finished your manuscript. But I was so, I had done all this research and I was so convinced that it was going to take a really long time. I thought, well, let me just get ahead of this process. I'll be writing, as I'm getting the rejection slips and pasting them on the wall, and I lost that opportunity as a result because, of course, when she said she wanted the full manuscript, I couldn't believe it. So I immediately got writer's block. And then I started looking for all the reasons why she wasn't a legitimate agent, or there was something wrong,
A scam.
I think it must have been a scam, And I think she eventually just, she thought, okay, well, she's not serious or whatever. So I lost that opportunity about, let's see, that maybe was almost 20 years ago. And that was a good lesson for me, but it didn't dampen my enthusiasm. I still kept writing. I kept entering competitions. I kept submitting. I kept, thinking about when I was going to query. So yeah, it's been quite a long journey for me, but yeah, ironically, when I decided just to relax and just focus on the work, still query, but to make it less of a big objective, that's when this happened.
It suddenly happened, yeah.
And did working on the short stories over all this time, that must have really helped you develop your voice and your style of writing and your planning or pantsing kind of editing style. And I imagine by the end of the process of a few years of short story writings, etc., you must have been a much more attractive offer to an agent, etc., because you'd really honed your craft a lot more.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that that actually hadn't been my experience. In terms of honing my craft as a writer, I tend to like stories that are told as much by the words that actually appear on the page and the words that don't make it there, the things that aren't said. That's what I like. I love the distillation of thought. I love economic language. So writing short stories over time really did help me to develop that. Mm-hmm. And actually, probably around the time that I was doing the MA, I discovered flash fiction, which was like, that was amazing. I really started to get into that. It was tremendously freeing, even though it was a smaller word space. So in terms of how I like to write and my style in terms of sparse prose or economic use of language, yes, the short stories were helpful. But I actually found that a bit of a challenge when I decided that How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House was going to be a novel, because my writing initially was very episodic. Mm-hmm. So I would sort of land on the wall in the room, write the story, and leave. And the story would be what's happening in that room at that point in time, with just enough backstory for you to understand it. But then I had a series of bits of narrative like that.
Yeah.
And that actually proved problematic when I was trying to put it together as a novel. So I had a really good novel tutor at the time, Rachel Jen. And she said to me, Cherie, what I think you might try is just putting all these episodes on different pieces of paper and getting some blue tack and just putting them on the wall and, walk up to them, read them, rearrange them, and start to get something that flows. And then you're going to have to write into those spaces where necessary. So in that regard, my short story writing was probably a little bit of a challenge when I came to write the novel. But in terms of my own style and voice, I think, yes, they really were very helpful.
And obviously, your debut novel, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, is just out, I think. And do you want to tell us a bit about what that novel is about?
Sure. So How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House is a story about a woman called Lala who lives on the beach in Barbados, who lives and works on the beach. She's a hair braider on Baxter's Beach in Barbados. And she is married to a criminal by the name of Aiden. And the story is set in the mid-1980s when she has her first child. And on the night that her daughter is born, there's also a pretty gruesome murder on the beach. So the story traces how those two events are connected. It also addresses themes of generations of violence, responses to violence and poverty. It seeks to examine some of the differences between the picture perfect postcard Barbados that's presented to tourists and that some tourists actually experience when they're here, and the reality of life for a particular set of Barbadians who live on that beach. So that is essentially what the story is about. And in telling Lala's story as well, I do reach back quite a bit to tell her mother's and grandmother's stories also, because that provides a lot of the background for her own choices and her own development by the time the novel ends.
I mean, it sounds like a really interesting story, and it sounds like quite a hard story in terms of it's not an easy story to read and imagine, not to write as well. And what was it that drew you to that story?
Okay, so there are a couple things there. The way that I tend to start my stories is that I will hear a character speaking to me. So I'll hear a few lines from the story, or I'll hear something that the character says in my head. I was working in the UK at the time, and I was on the last leg of a very long commute home from work. And this character just started to speak to me. I think what attracted me to this story was, one, some of the similarities between myself and the character. And then two, when I understood what the time period of the story would be. The 80s was for me when I really came into myself, I think, as a person. And there were lots of things about the 80s that were no longer with us. And it was a great opportunity to write about them and to go into that. So it was very difficult to write, and it was difficult precisely because I had experienced similar things. So it was almost like revisiting with somebody else, with another character, things that I didn't particularly want to remember. So that was difficult. But I think the good thing about that was, I think it put me in the best position to write the story. So it was incredibly healing for me personally, but it was also a benefit in that I was able to approach the story with some knowledge of, some of the surrounding circumstances, some of the psychological issues, and that made it a lot easier for me to write. So it really was hearing a character in my head and deciding, to follow the breadcrumbs and then write about it.
And when you're writing a story like that you're bringing so much to, from your own experiences and things like that, how do you deal with an editor's notes, for example? Do you ever feel that sense of pushback against what they're suggesting, or how do you process that?
Right. So in terms of well, I'll let you in on a secret as it relates to the book. There is one part of the book, what now comes at the beginning, which is the myth, after which the entire novel is made. That didn't actually come at the beginning,
right,
in my draft. That came later on in the story. And one of my editors said to me, I think you need to put this right at the beginning. I think it needs to be a prologue. And I said, prologue? Like, that's against everything I was taught, in my MA. Like, who needs a prologue? If you need a prologue, something's wrong with the story. And that was sort of the thought process in my head and so on. And it's just kudos to my editor, that particular editor, Imogen, because she just, she gave me the idea, and I sat down and I thought about it, and I said, okay, Cherie, just try. And I put it at the front, and it was like, the light came on and the world opened up, and it just made so much sense. So for me, I think there is that attachment to the story, but I think by the time I finished and edited that story, it was something separate from me. It had a life and a body of its own, and I was able to just be about crafting it best I could, and then polishing and editing to make sure it shone the way it was supposed to. So it really wasn't my story. So even though I could identify with certain things, there wasn't that ownership to the extent that if there was an editorial comment, I'd know, that has to happen. That didn't happen to me. But there were some edits that I kind of thought, like a prologue, do I really want to do that? And it had to be there. I think we built that level of trust, that my editors were really, really good in terms of how they delivered the comments, and I had to have that openness to receive what they were saying and to see how I could make it better. And at the end of the day, I think it really was best where she suggested. So yes.
And there's been quite a lot of buzz about the novel. I think the quote from Bernardine Evaristo was a hard-hitting and unflinching novel from a bold new writer. I mean, how do you deal with a quote like that? That's just fantastic.
You deal with it from flat on your belly on the floor in tears, screaming like, does she really know my name? That's kind of how you deal with it, which means you don't. It's surreal. Oh no, some days I just kind of like pinch myself. Is this really happening? But it's been incredible, and it's wonderful that people have engaged with the book, not just authors who are already well known and who are way better than I am, but also just readers and reviewers, normal working women and men who've read it and engaged with it and took something from it and enjoyed it. I'm really, really happy about that, because I do recognize that it's not an easy read. It's not something that you kind of go to escape. you know, and have a light read that relaxes you. It's not that type of book. So I really appreciate everybody who takes the time to actually read it. And then it's also really, really gratifying when people enjoy it, especially people like Bernardine Evaristo. I mean, like, who knew, you know?
Yeah,
that's been great.
It's got some fantastic reviews. I was looking on Amazon and Goodreads as well. It really has connected with people, I think. And how, you know, unfortunately, this is a question we have to ask in present times. But you know, how has the launch gone? Because obviously, it's not a normal time to be launching a book. How have you found that?
So far, I think, you know, it's been going really well in terms of the response. It launched in the UK on the 21st of January, which is just last week, Thursday. And it will launch in the US on the 2nd of February. And I think in Canada, I think it's out officially tomorrow, even though some people, I think, have started getting copies. So I actually, at this point in time, have no idea how sales are going. And I am just still caught up in the euphoria of people reading it and engaging with it and liking it. I tend to be a glass half full type of person. So believe it or not, having written that book, but I actually think that, you know, the pandemic has been good in terms of allowing people a little bit more time for introspection, and perhaps, you know, if going out is not as much of an option as it was previously, then, you know, hopefully people are reading and discovering books by new authors and perhaps non-traditional voices. So, you know, I'm not at this point in time. I hope I can admit that. I don't know how sales are going, but just the reviews and the response that I've had, and people messaging me to say, you know, I found you on Instagram, I read the book and I really, really loved it, and so on. That has been just enormously gratifying. So I suppose at the point when I start thinking again that maybe I want to give up the day job, then I'll probably want to know how the sales are going. But for now, I'm just happy with the response that I have gotten.
And you mentioned there about the types of voices that we're seeing in writing now, and you've been writing for a long time, a lot of short stories, etc. And what's your view on how things have changed over the years in terms of authentic voices and publishing and the types of voices that we're now seeing? Is it changed over your experience?
I think it has. I think for me, Caribbean authors were publishing for quite a long time. I think what wasn't happening is that we didn't have that world audience. I don't think the wider world was paying as much attention as it is now. And that's partially because of writers like Marlon James and Kai Miller and Naomi Jackson that have done fantastic things. They've produced work that everyone can identify with at some level, and that's just, you know, quite apart from their origin or where it's set or what it's based on, what particular type of history. It's just good work. So for me, I think the difference now is that there's a larger, more receptive audience that's actually engaged and looking to listen to what authors from my part of the world, or who share my characteristics in one form or the other, have to say, and that's great. I think also, you know, globalization and the internet, you know, when I remember when I started to write, I told you about the yearbook for writers and artists, and I remember, you know, scribbling down addresses on envelopes and putting in a stamped self-addressed envelope and trying to explain to the lady at the post office why she had to give me postal coupons and how they were going to work, internationally, because I would go and buy these postal coupons and put them in there because obviously I couldn't put stamps on, it wasn't the same system. And sending them off and crossing my fingers. And I remember that time where you'd have agents saying, don't send us an email, send us a hard copy manuscript.
Oh, really?
We'll
Okay.
get back to you, And things have changed so much now. And that is so good for authors from, these parts of the world, because it gives us more access to that wider audience. And I think that can only enrich the reading and writing experience for everybody. So I think it's a wonderful time to be a Caribbean writer, and I'm so happy and pleased that people are paying attention to voices that might not have been the traditional voices in publishing. So yeah, I'm really happy about that. I'm very optimistic.
And you, as we've mentioned, you do still have a day job. How, for the time being, hopefully not for much longer.
Don't tell my boss.
But how do you find the time to write? Is it where do you squeeze that in your day?
So the first thing I would say is that if I don't get the opportunity to write, it's worse for everybody. It's worse for the kids. It's worse for the job. I am just the craziest, most irritable person you will ever come across if there's a story sitting in my head that I can't get out. But having said that, what I've tended to do over the years is I get up generally at 3 a.m., especially if I am really deep into a project of something that I'm working on. I'll get up at 3 a.m. Some mornings I just don't go back to bed. So at that time of the morning when it's quiet and, the kids are sleeping, the TV's off, I can just put on my music and sit down and work. And I actually find that really energizing. So that is what I do. In addition to that, there are periods of time where I just go off. I will take my entire year's worth of holiday and go to a writer's colony. At one point in my career, it was the writer's colony at Dairy Hollow in Arkansas, the US. And I just go there for a couple of weeks and just immerse myself in my work, in my writing work. I would have done the same with the Vermont Studio Centre. Other times it's been less formal. I will just take time off and, fly to a friend's house, somebody whose house is vacant, and just take that time. So it's been a mixture of taking blocks of time to work on my writing and consistently getting up at 3 a.m. and doing as much work as I can until everybody comes awake and it's time for me to get ready for work. So, yeah.
And when you're doing that whole process, what kind of, are you a planner or a pantser? Are you spending that month away working out plot points and arcs, or do you spend that month just saying, no, I know where I'm going, or I just want to hammer it out and just see what happens and just see what kind of book I have at the end of the month?
So I am definitely more of an intuitive writer. It's a very organic process for me. I don't plan an outline. I don't know how it's going to end. I just listen to this character in that initial stage. That initial bit of inspiration is just trying to get down what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, what I think I'm being told. I think that's the best way I can express it. The stage after that is more about crafting. So that's when I can ask some questions. I want to know what's the motivation for this particular type of behavior. What could have happened in the past? how did that come about? What type of person does this? What does he or she look like? Not necessarily physically, but psychologically. So I ask those types of questions, and then I'm trying to get at the real story. I'm trying to just get an outline of the story, because I've said before that, while I have these characters speaking to me, they don't all tell the truth, and they're not usually very forthcoming when I first ask questions. So that's a little bit of digging to get at the real story. So at that point, I'm trying to craft the story in a way that makes it shine, makes it, ensures that, just what needs to be on that page to tell this story is on the page. And then after that, I'm really divorced from the characters and everything else. And it's just about editing what needs to be cut, what doesn't contribute to the story. I've killed a few characters that way, but it's part of the job, and that's just how it goes. So that really is that's my process.
And do you go through a number of sort of complete drafts of something of novel length, or do you revise as you go and then have something reasonably close to finished at the end?
No, so for me, it works best if I get that initial draft out first. When that character is talking to me, I better hurry up and write it down. So there's that sense of just trying to hear, just trying to see. It's almost like I'm bringing something from another place into the realm that I am in. So I'm just trying to understand what that is and put it down. I find that if I start editing too early, it can just stop that process.
Right.
So I need to get that draft out first. So that's the initial inspiration. Having said that, by the time we get to crafting and editing, definitely I can go through a number of drafts. Sometimes it's very frustrating for how the one-armed sister sweeps her house. It started off in the first person and it was Lala talking, and I had gotten an entire draft like that before I recognized, actually, based on what she's going through, she doesn't have that agency, and it's going to be very difficult for her to tell this story. Because of the trauma that she's experiencing. She's going to be unreliable, but then there are things that you want to get out that you won't be able to get out with in the first person. So, and that was a full draft. And I'm sure I don't have to explain to you what it's like having to sit at a computer and look for every single part you said and, try to change that around. It was just crazy, but that's part of that's the hard work, that's the elbow grease, but it really altogether it's a joyful experience. So yes, I did go through several drafts, and I thought I'd finished with that process when my agent said, yes, we're ready to query, we're ready to send out to publishing houses. And of course then the real editing started. So we had about I think there were about another 2 drafts after that. So yes, I think that's just part of the terrain, and it's something that I've come to welcome now, because I do have some old manuscripts that I look at 3 years down the line and think, what were you thinking? You really thought this was done? Like, this is not done. So I have several drafts, and I've learned to just accept that that's the process now.
And do you, at what point do you show someone the work? Is it a case of keeping it close to your chest until you're completely happy with it, or do you need that kind of outside input to help shape it?
I actually don't like the outside input. So, and that was one of the challenges for me when studying, when I was doing the MA, and then when I started the creative component of my postgrad research. At that early stage, the feedback can be a little distracting. So I like to be able to, if I've finished that first draft, I can show parts of it or I can show the whole thing when I'm going into that crafting stage. But I tend not to like to show my work when I'm able to look at it and say, well, this is very early stages. You've basically just listened and written down what you heard, but you haven't really done any crafting. You have not started consciously applying creative writing techniques to this. You haven't started to interrogate this narrative or this character. You haven't done that. So I tend not to like to share it before that. Of course, with some of the deadlines, you know, during the MA and so on, I didn't have a choice. I had to sort of feed the monster in the form of my supervisor, who would just be like, Cherie, you know, get it to me. I need to see it. But yeah, I tend to ideally I'd be able to get that first bit out and then share it. And at that point, it's really, I like to share with people whose opinion I value and people I trust, to give me that type of community feedback. And then after that, when I think I'm done, I can send to a competition. How the One Arm Sister Sweet Sorrows, for example, I'd entered it in a local competition. And a big part of the reason for that was that you get feedback from the judges. I mean, how many competitions offer that? And it wasn't just, you know, a few lines in writing. You actually get the opportunity to go sit with them and have them tell you what their impressions are. And that was tremendously useful. But at that point, in the process, I think a little earlier, I might not have, you know, it could actually probably stop me from being able to continue and to finish.
And obviously, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House is just out, but are you working on a new novel just now, or have you got an idea for one? Yeah.
I definitely am working on a new novel. There's always short fiction and flash fiction going on in the background. So invariably, I'm working on more than one thing at a time. So yes, there is a flash fiction collection that I'm working on. I'm also working on a novel that's set on a cocoa plantation in Trinidad in the mid-19th century. And it's being told at this point in time from the perspective of an 8-year-old little girl.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not at the point yet where I can say exactly what the story is. I kind of have an idea of what it's about and where it's going, but, you know, running down the rabbit holes and so on is part of the process for me at this point in time. So that's what I'm working on.
Is there a pressure, or do you feel a pressure on you for that kind of second album syndrome of, you know, everyone kind of knows you now and you've got to follow up with something, or do you not really? Do you kind of put that out of your mind completely and just do your own pace?
The thing is, at a certain point, my only loyalty is to the story. So there's a point that I get to where it's, you know, I just want to make sure that it's almost like if I've been like a servant in a way, and I just want to make sure that I've done justice to what I feel I've been asked to do the best way I know how. If I'm happy with that, I'm less worried about what other people think. But I do have to say, after such a long time, you know, just being in the trenches and everybody thinking, you know, you're crazy for leaving that job and going to do this. I mean, what's writing? Like, how are you going to get money and so on? And then to have this novel come out after all of that, and to get such a great, you know, sort of rapturous response. I do think when I really get into the second one, when I'm getting to that point of perhaps being closer to release, I think there probably will be that temptation to stop and say, hang on, what are people going to think of this? Will they like it as much? Writing is very personal. We can't get away from that, even if it's not our story. So there is that element of, I hope people will like it. But at the end of the day, I just want to be able to think, to sleep and to think knowing that I did the best job I possibly could. That's the best story I could have written. That's the best treatment I could have given to the story. Possibly somebody could have done it better, but it was mine to deliver at that point in time, and that's all I could do. So after that, it kind of goes out into the world, and it's no longer mine. Yeah. So that's how I look at it.
And is that a novel that you're working on just now? Do you have a deal for that, or is that going to just be a separate pitch at some point?
Yeah. So I don't have a deal for that. I'm sure my agent, she is like badass. Can I say that?
Yeah, you can say that. That's fine.
She is totally badass. I don't know. This I am just in awe of my agent. She's very forthright. She knows her stuff. I just feel like I'm in very safe hands with her. We don't have a deal for that one yet, but I'm sure, once she thinks it passes muster, she'll get on that. So I'm not too worried about a deal right now. Of course, if a year from now I'm still in the day job, I think I will be a lot more concerned.
Who is your agent? Give her a shout out since she's a badass.
Oh, Claire Alexander at Aiken Alexander, the absolute best.
Excellent. There you go, Claire. Big shout out.
Yes.
Brilliant.
What was the last book that you read?
Mm-hmm. So the last book that I read was actually In Praise of Love and Children by Beryl Gilroy. She's a Caribbean writer, and it's published by People Tree Press. And I was actually reading it I read it for pleasure, but I also read it to try to examine what some of the early Caribbean female authors, how they were treating with issues like domestic violence and other women's issues. So it was tremendously edifying from that perspective. And I also enjoyed it in terms of the immigrant experience and what some of the concerns were at that point in time. So that's the last book I read.
Cool.
Nice. And what about the last TV show that you watched?
Oh my gosh, TV shows, that's my area. The Crown.
Nice.
The Crown and the Queen's Gambit.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely enjoyed those two. I love anything that takes me back to a bygone era. I love the costumes. I loved feeling as if I was transported into the past. Quite apart from that, it was just some very, very good writing. And I really appreciated that. So it would have been those two, The Queen's Gambit and Bridgerton. Sorry.
Bridgerton.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bridgerton, yes.
And the last film you saw?
The last film, no, I haven't gone to the movies a lot in a long time, probably since last year, with COVID. I did watch, what was the name of that? It was about Madam C.J. Walker, who invented hair products for Black women. It was serialized. I think there were probably about 5 or 6 episodes.
Right. Oh,
I did watch
Self-Made.
I think Self-Made. Yes, I think that was the name of it. And prior to that, the movie that just just came to my mind when you asked me that, even though it might not actually have been the last one, was Joker.
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely loved Joker. I love any literature or movie, any art that explores the darker side of the human psyche. And I just thought, the Joker was just so well done. I really enjoyed that movie.
Yeah, it certainly does that.
Yeah.
And the very last thing we always do is a quick fire, either or, and there's no right answer apart from one question. And the first one is Marlon James or Bernardine Evaristo?
Bernardine Evaristo.
No hesitation.
No. I love Marlon James. I feel bad. I love Marlon James,
But he didn't give you a quote for your book.
Yeah, screw Marlon.
The Book of Night Women, I absolutely enjoyed that. I do, there are some arguments that I would probably have with him given the opportunity to, but I think Bernardine Evaristo for me on that.
Excellent. TV or cinema?
Cinema. There's just something about sitting in the cinema and having that stereo, surround sound and just this huge screen and just getting totally immersed in what's on the screen. So I'd say cinema.
Nice. Fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Fancy restaurant, of course.
And the last one, real book or ebook?
Oh, real book. There is nothing like that smell when you open the covers and it's new and it's just there's just this experience and being able to touch it and having your bookmark to the last page or I still like to look at books that I bought a long time ago, and I would always write my name and the date that I bought the book, and it would just take me back. It's just a wonderful experience for me to have a printed book in my hand. Yeah. I'm not that big on ebooks, to be honest. I can understand, how useful they are. I do listen to books on Audible, mostly self-help. But a good piece of fiction, I want that book in my hands and I want to be able to get in there. So yes, definitely hard.
I will never understand.
You've disappointed Tarek there.
Was like about smelling books, if I'm quite honest.
Was he hoping that I would say
he's very much an ebook advocate, whereas I'm for the real books, so I'm very happy with that answer.
Yeah, real books over here. Yes, I love a real book.
So I think, Tarek, I've thought how to resolve this ebook, real book thing that is going so badly for you.
Debatable.
You declare now that you admit that everyone prefers real books, and then we can change it to audiobooks and audiobooks and ebooks, sorry. And you might have a chance there, I'm not sure.
Wait, so am I being forced to take a side in this new? Are you always the real book man? Am I just?
Well, no, the real books is one, so you have to accept that publicly, and then we can bring in audiobooks and ebooks, or audiobooks and real books, whatever you want. You can change
All right, you
up.
know what? I'm. It's democracy is democracy, and I'm happy to say that I don't agree with the outcome, but there's obviously a lot of idiots out there. And who love smelling books and all this kind of weird stuff that I don't understand. But fair enough, go for it. Go. I'm happy to put my hands up and say, real books, well played.
Okay, excellent. Good. That's resolved. So next week there will be well, actually, no, there's some in the can, of course. That's the only problem.
Oh,
but
yeah.
We will bring in audiobooks.
I really admitted,
yeah.
I should have waited. Actually, now I think about it, they're all ebook winners. That possibly pulled me over the edge if I just hung back. Well played, Marco. You completely tricked me.
Exactly. Excellent. But I really enjoyed that chat with Cherie. I thought it was really interesting, actually.
Really fun. Yeah, it was a really fun chat, and it was really interesting what she was saying about kind of waiting for that character to speak to her to get that kind of spark of something going, and then just letting it organically grow from there, and not really planning it too much. It's a
I always wonder about that. Like, just because I'm a compulsive planner to my detriment, I think, in some ways, because I'll spend so long doing a plan that I tie myself up in knots sometimes. But you know, if you're someone that just writes like that, I would always worry, and this comes from me being a planner, because it obviously does work as a process, but that you'll be left with something that might be very well written, but it doesn't form a story at the end of the day. I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You kind of my worry is that you end up kind of writing yourself into a corner, or and I guess, of course, that's what rewrites are for, edits are for. You go back and you give
the
yourself
crafting
out,
bit of it.
But that's my fear of going without that kind of knowledge of where I'm going, at least of some degree. You know, there's always that moment when you think, oh, an idea comes to you, and you think, actually, I could do this.
Yeah,
I could change
absolutely.
That, and that's great, but
I like having the security of a plan behind that. Then I
blanket.
feel ready to go off on tangents or whatever. But
no, but I've a played hoping the safety mat will be there on the ground when you get there.
Exactly. But it was really good of Cherie to take the time to come onto the podcast, and I think How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House is going to be a very big book. You know, if you've got authors of the standard of Bernardine Evaristo and Mark Haddon giving you brilliant reviews, then it deserves to do really, really well. So do check that out, although it is, as we discussed, quite a hard-hitting novel there. But next week, we've got another great guest on the podcast.
We do indeed. Next week, we are chatting with Mary Hannah, who is an multi-award winning author, crime novels, police procedural type novels. It's a very kind of interesting angle that she has. She used to be a probation officer, so she kind of has that knowledge, and her partner's a detective. So there's an authenticity there to, I think, a lot of books maybe don't have, and they're really fantastic crime novels. Yeah,
and her latest, Without a Trace, won the Capital Crime Book of the Year, I think, in 2020. Right. So it's a really great chat with Mary, so please do tune in for that one. Before we go, I will ask, as always, if you enjoyed the podcast, to give us a quick rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use, and if you want to leave a review praising the podcast, even better. So please do take the time to do that. It really helps us in terms of staying up in the rankings and continuing to get great guests on the podcast.
And of course, if you want to get in touch, you can always send us an email to podcast@rightgear.co.uk, or Twitter can be or a tweet.
A Twitter?
A Twitter?
What's a Twitter?
That's why I don't do very well on social media. Or a tweet can be sent to @right_gear. And already the number of tweets I've had.
I had to turn off the notifications because of the number of tweets.
That we get. Sleep.
Exactly.
Constantly buzzing. And and listen, people, all the ebook warriors that have been backing me on Twitter. It's just
I think those are Russian bots or something, Tarek, that you've programmed. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is @UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.